Poštovane dame I gospodo, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very happy to be here at the third conference. I think I've been at all of them, and this is the biggest one with the greatest number of players so far, so congratulations to the organizers and to all of you for making this a success. Several weeks ago, I was sitting in this very hotel in another conference room at another major conference arranged by our host, Mr. Simeon Somokos, listening to a panel of eminent macroeconomists talking about prospects for Serbia. And as I listened, I thought to myself that eminent though they may be, they were missing something important in their analysis. What a number of them were saying was that they did not see inherent in-country sources for growth for the Serbian economy. A sprinkling of foreign manufacturing investment here, a seasonal bump up in agriculture there, but no game changer. And I kept waiting and thinking, when will someone mention exploration and mining? Well, it never happened at that panel. But it's all that we're talking about today at this conference. Somehow, whether it's in the ministries of finance or economy or in the media, somewhere, the connection must be made in and to the broader economic debate between the development of Serbia's increasingly well-defined natural resources. We've discovered today how many different ways there are of categorizing them, and the huge potential for material, financial, and societal benefits at the national, regional, and local level. I mean, a spontaneous suggestion would be to rent a big four-wheel drive bus and take all those macroeconomists out to a drill site. I don't know, maybe that would be a start. But it's clearly not the only thing you would need to do. Mainstreaming mining as part of the Serbia brand, as part of its international economic relationships, is clearly something that will be very useful here. It's certainly something that my own country, Canada, has done, and it's also done it, in our case, by setting ourselves up as a kind of plaque tournant, as a kind of center for organizing investment in mining. Professor Jelenkovic has mentioned the importance of the private exploration and mining sector in promoting Serbia's potential for mining to the world. We've seen that happen at the annual Prospectors Developers Association Conference in Toronto every March. And in fact, this last year, a number of the companies present here organized a full-day session together with partners in the Canadian banking sector to highlight the opportunities in and with Serbia. I'm hoping now that Serbian ministries will also join in this international showcase for exchanging information and also assessing the competition, who has the comparative advantages and where does a country like Serbia fit in the international mining world, in a forum where you've got about 80 other mining ministers attending and promoting their own countries to the global investment and mining community. It could be a sort of a PPP, not one of those official ones under the law and concessions, but a sort of a partnership between the industry and I think the Serbian government that would be well worth considering for this and other international fora. Well, let's come back to the example again of my own country. As the history of Canada has shown, natural resources can play an important role in the development of local and national economies. As a result of that experience, we've been a leader in mining expertise and operations both in our country and internationally. Our mining sector is one of the country's most significant outside investors, responsible for about 10% of Canadian direct investment abroad. The total value of Canadian mining assets abroad is valued at $109 billion. Two-thirds of those are in the Western Hemisphere, just under 50% in Mexico, Chile, and the United States. But as we've seen, a proportion of those are also in Serbia. But to illustrate the size of the industry, there are about 1,600 Canadian mining-related companies listed on the Toronto Exchange. There are probably 700 listed on the Australian Exchange and around 200 on the New York Stock Exchange. So given that Canadian companies are world leaders in exploration, mining, and other resource extraction, and the numerical preponderance of those companies is similar here on the ground in Serbia, the question of how to ensure that the natural resource sector effectively contributes to realizing development objectives, economic objectives, is an important one for Canada's foreign policy. Just as companies need a social license, as the last presenter mentioned, so do countries that are home to investors need an international license for companies to operate effectively in foreign environments. Now, natural resource abundance represents a potentially significant economic engine through direct tax and royalty transfers to local authorities, employment and service purchasing, business creation, community development programs. Again, we've seen that in the last presentation. And these mineral resources have the potential, used right, to transform countries that have a lot of that wealth still in the ground. Now, let me admit, not so much at the outset as in the middle of this presentation, that resource extraction, if mishandled by public policy, if either strangled at birth or let to run uncontrollably, can also do the very opposite. Mining done wrong can itself create very serious and long-lasting development deficits in the form of the pathology of the so-called resource curse. And that would be when dealing with very weak institutions, significant corruption, and the negotiation of bad deals against which an enraged population then either elects politicians or rebels. But what we have here, the good news here, is that much of that debate happening in Canada, elsewhere in NGO circles, is about countries with only a fraction of Serbia's mining tradition, expertise, and governance capacities. What we're talking about here is how to get things right, or better, and maximize benefits in an upper middle income country on the threshold of European Union accession. So maybe I thought I'd give as an example some of the spin-off and benefits picture in, let's say, roughly analogous countries from our own hemisphere, say Chile, where, again, Canadian companies are very strongly represented. If you take an average mining project, and I think that's well known to most of you here, but I'm, for the benefit of policymakers and others, just want to make that point. Exploration, feasibility studies, mine design, about 100 to 200 workers each, mostly highly skilled, a period of 2 to 4 years or more. And I'd flag here that in a way, exploration is a business in and of itself. Because often in some of the discussions here in Serbia, I've heard, my exploration, never mind, where's the mine? Countries and economies can benefit both from the exploration phase, the building phase, which again then employs about 1,000 to 3,000 workers, as well as finally the production and operation phase. It's a continuum. Again, you've seen it illustrated in PowerPoint slides, but it needs to be thought of as a continuum and not just as an annoyance on the way to the big ribbon cutting at the opening of the big mine. And then closure and winding down. What you also, and the evidence here that's been collected, in fact, not by company promoters of CSR or public relations divisions, but by a critical NGO in Canada, the North-South Institute, their fieldwork shows that the common perception that mining simply creates jobs primarily for outsiders is incorrect. Companies hire and train locals because that's the most economically profitable strategy. And again, we've seen that in the last presentation demonstrated in the example of the Australian engineering company. And that's because workers here and in other countries are already relatively skilled. There are fewer commuting costs, and local hiring solidifies support in immediate communities for mining projects. So if you look at then at all the money that's being spent in all these phases, from exploration through to closure, the multiplier in the Latin American case is between 2 and 5, and actually you get to the higher end of the economic multiplier in terms of the indirect spin-offs from the direct spending in the middle to higher income countries. In other words, the more sophisticated the economy, actually the greater the spin-off effects are, which is good news for Serbia, which is on that more sophisticated end of the spectrum. So when maybe part of the discussion here in one of the panels was somebody was talking about $1 billion, someone was talking about 300 million. Let me try and make a bridge between those two figures. The direct investment in terms of spending on direct salaries, actual spending by companies, indeed, probably around 300 plus million for 3 key companies. But the spin-offs into local communities are probably, and have been over the last 10 years, close to $1 billion. So I think these are orders of magnitude we need to bear in mind. A lot then depends, and we've heard it here, on national regulation, but a lot also depends on local authorities and the willingness of local communities to take advantage of the opportunities that exploration and mining offers. And here let me again give you an example coming from Canada, from, if you will, the nerazvijeni opštine of northern Canada. I think in Serbia the issue is more in the south. With us it's more in the north. It's a tale of 2 shores of James Bay. James Bay is the southernmost tip of Hudson's Bay, the big thing that sort of shows up right in the middle of Canada, plunging down from the Arctic Ocean, the southern tip, James Bay. There you have living the Indian First Nation of the Cree, traditional dwellers of the northern forests, boreal forests in Canada. You have bands and tribes of the Cree who live in Ontario on the western shore of James Bay, and those who live in Quebec on the eastern shore. The ones on the western shore, rather weak governance, lack of interest in training and education, and a sort of reflexively, if you will, negative approach to mining development, are in constant social crisis, despite receiving what is actually a very similar level of support from central and provincial authorities. They've been much in the news in Canada. What was interesting was that our national broadcaster then went to the eastern shore of James Bay, also the Cree, speaking the same native Indian language, and who have for 40 years been locked in a series of land claim discussions, sometimes struggles with the federal government, but who achieved a degree of local ownership, not in the sense of strategic partnership, forced ownership, but in the sense of engagement with the projects and ability to work with project managers and designers in putting together packages that worked for them in their northern forest environment. And the community in crisis on the western shore is named Arawapiskat, and so the correspondent said there, the neat streets of Wemindji or Wejebugamu feel like they're on a different planet than Arawapiskat. If the stop signs weren't in Cree, you'd think the rows of warm, solid homes were in a suburb down south. Shiny new courthouses, band offices, recreation centers, police stations. No crisis to summon reporters. What was different was a different approach to governance, a different set of local leaders who were willing to be demanding yet reasonable in what they expected from the mining industry, who had taken previous exposure to the resource industry, hydropower in that case in Quebec, taken those resources and invested them in companies, local airlines, construction companies where they could employ their own people and offer then those services to mining. In this case, Goldcorp. It has a $1.8 billion mine under construction in northern Quebec, signed a collaboration agreement with the local communities, linked to job and skills creation, education, economic and business development activities. As a result, Cree companies, Cree-owned companies received 81% of the total contracts awarded at the mine in 2012 for a total value of $40 million. Now again, this is, there aren't direct comparisons. However, these are, and anyone who goes around Serbia, as I have, will hear a lot of discussion about the famed mentalitet, where people will look at you and say, sorry, we could do things. If it weren't for our mentalitet, we could do a whole lot. And that is something that certainly we also hear in dealing with some of the deep-seated problems of Canada's First Nations, which have had a difficult history over the last several hundred years in North America. But what this tale of two shores shows is that with the right local leadership, with the right combination of skills and determination, this can be made to work and should be made to work. So all of this, of course, needs the framework of strong institutions at different levels of government, regulations, other checks and balances. The practical challenge is how to effectively build local and national institutions and government capacity in the natural resource sector before and while resource extraction is taking place. Having the agreed rules that operate in a way that no one feels taken to the cleaners or somehow cheated. Perhaps not no one, but at least the vast majority of people feel that their interests have been taken into account. What this requires is the dreaded phrase capacity building. Anyone who's had to deal with technical assistance during the transition period here in Serbia knows that the word capacity building has been used to death and hasn't always delivered on its promise. But this is, I think, one area where both IFI contributions with advice and support, a sort of a partnership relationship from the industry itself, drawing on what they know of best practices from areas of operation internationally, partner governments that can draw on their expertise, can all help. I think as well the accelerated economic reforms which have been announced by the Ministers of Finance and Economy here in Serbia, with their emphasis on transparency, on ensuring that whether it's in the state sector or anywhere else, you can follow the money, and on the speed of necessary transformation, a sense of urgency, which I certainly now feel on the part of key players in the government of Serbia to make things happen. They're an opportunity for all of us together to make resource development more effective and more productive for the people of Serbia and for their international partners, and that for our mutual benefit. Thank you.